back in the early days, very early days, the original Elite on the BBC Micro was pretty cool. I was making games on the BBC, and Elite came out from David Braben and Ian Bell, which was cool. Also, later on after Wing Commander had came out, Larry Holland had done the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, which were very cool, so I like those. So I would say those would probably be the ones that weren't my own games, that were the ones that I liked the most. I mean, later on there was stuff like Independence War and Free Space, and they were well done, but sort of my kind of nostalgia would be more like the late 80s or the early 90s. Well, I mean, so the inspiration for Wing Commander was just essentially watching all these movies growing up as a kid. You know, Star Wars was obviously a pretty big one, but TV show like Battlestar, the original Battlestar Galactica, and also, you know, films that aren't science fiction, but like Top Gun or whatever, where you sort of, I wanted to be in that movie that I saw. And so that was the whole idea of Wing Commander, was to take the cinematic approach and use that to try and put you in this world and universe. So you felt like you were part of it. So that was the whole point of, like, you sit in the cockpit, you can see your hand on the joystick, and it was sort of almost like the first FPS kind of stuff, where you can sort of see yourself in the location, and using sort of cinematic techniques and motifs to sort of make you feel like you're this hero in this, great movie, and you're saving the galaxy from the bad guys or whatever it would be. So I think the combination of kind of that sort of first-person action, which in this case was flying a spaceship, and using kind of cinematic storytelling techniques and making it more about the story and the characters, and you wanting to sort of succeed in your sort of in the setup of the story you're in, is sort of what I think Wing Commander in the early, if you look back at what Wing Commander does or did back then, and you see a lot of games now, a lot of the sort of kind of cinematic techniques, and the fact that it was more about character and story and less about high score or anything, is sort of, I would say, is a lot of the influence Wing Commander had on later games was that, and that was kind of my objective. I mean, I just like movies, I like games, but I wanted the game to be about something more than a high score, and that was one of the big driving factors of Wing Commander. Well, I think the biggest thing that we're concentrating on right now is the ability of all the players to sort of communicate and work together and sort of be in the same space together. So some of the things that are different with Star Citizen than, say, some of the games I've done before, like Wing Commander, is the multiplayer aspect. And it's also the multiplayer aspect in terms of not just you're in individual ships dogfighting against each other, but you and 3 or 4 or 6 or 7 or 8 of your friends could all be on one ship operating it together, going wherever, down to a planet or down to a space station, or getting in a dogfight in an asteroid field, and you're sort of doing it together, and you can look over to see your friend driving the ship, or you can go back and see someone manning a turret. So that aspect of sort of cooperation and interaction with your friends to do stuff. So a lot of it cooperatively, some of it may be in opposition, but I would say that you would, more often than not, even when I see people play the sort of early alpha builds, they're sort of doing things together, and it's actually really quite cool. So I think that's a key element to sort of the early fun, because we're still at the formative stages of putting the systems in place and the missions and the various kind of gameplays that will give you the structure to exist inside this world. So that's important to me. And then the other thing is just to make sure that the general game mechanics themselves are simple enough, like whether it's running around on foot shooting a gun like you would in an FPS, or flying your ship and getting involved in dogfights, or EVAing around. So getting those to be fun and accessible, a combination where they feel like they've got enough nuance and complexity where if you really want to concentrate it, you can get good at it, and you can be better than someone that's sort of casual, but enough, but not too complicated where you can't, it's too difficult for someone that just has started to get into it. So we're sort of working on those balances. It's a long process, and one of the things that's really cool about doing a crowdfunded game is that you sort of get builds out there, and it's not perfect, or you're trying ideas out, and you sort of see how people react to it. Is this fun? Is this easy? Is this something that people like? And that helps shape sort of your decisions as you're carrying on to develop it. So it's a really good sort of iterative feedback loop, more so than perhaps you would get in traditional development. Well, I mean, it's always a challenge. You're never going to make everyone happy all the time. So what I tell the development teams is to concentrate on what they feel is right, and when they're listening to the feedback from the community, you should listen to it, but you should really sort of only take on things that you resonate with you, that agree with you. That's the way I look at it. So I look at the community that we have, because I know there's no way that everyone's going to get the game they want, because it's just impossible, right? I mean, if there's 8 of you going to get lunch somewhere, deciding on where to go to lunch is difficult enough. So, you have 1,000 people or 100,000 people or 1 million people, it's just gets worse. So the core for me is that there's a certain kind of game that I want to play as a player, and that's really sort of what we're building in Star Citizen. And I think a lot of the people on the development team share that sort of ambition of this style of game. And then we use the community as a really useful sounding board, like to, what things are they interested in, or what do they like, or if we give a build, what do they like about it, what they don't like about it, and you use that as constructive feedback, and the stuff that you agree with, you take on, and the stuff you don't agree with, then you just move on with stuff. I mean, there's no other way, because if you try to please all these different groups, you'll not end up making a very good game. You have to have a pretty consistent vision, and so the way I look at it is, stick to the vision and use your community to help guide you along that vision. You have to have a bit of a thick skin in that case, because it's, there's always, I read all this stuff from people like, how will you do this? That's really stupid. This is crap. And, if you read all this, you'd be thinking, well, they mustn't think that I know what I'm doing, but then they did, back and give money to make the game, so obviously they must have done that for a reason. So, but I think that's just the nature of the internet, right? So I do know that, like, when we do things, if there's a particular issue or outcry and people are upset about stuff, we do try to verify that it really is something that's a big deal, or it's not just 5 people shouting really loudly, because you can get that in today's world. In today's world, it's a small group of people can be very loud, and there's a lot of people that usually don't say much. So we do things besides looking at what people say on the forums and Reddit and all the rest of the stuff. We actually look at kind of what's happening in the game. Like, we get telemetry from how they're playing it, who's winning, who's losing in terms of battles. There's this ship overpowered compared to this ship. What are people doing in the game? Watching people play it, and then we use all of that as input to help us sort of make the game that we're trying to make. But I'm not fooling myself that we're going to please every single one of the backers. That's not going to happen. What I do think is we're going to make something that will be cool enough that pretty much everyone hopefully will be happy with it. So it may not have every feature they want. It may not play in some ways the way they want in certain aspects of it. But in the balance of things, it's, I'm hoping that they'll think it's a really good game and something they can spend years adventuring around inside. Well, several things. One, we have a big company, right? And everybody's just working to make the game bigger and better. And we sort of gauge the size of the team and kind of the ambition of what we're doing based on how much money we sort of make every month. So we have a bunch of cash in reserve, but if we're bringing in a decent amount of new people, because it's less about concept sales help, and it's cool, and that's a way to support development. But in some ways, it's more about also bringing new people into the community, because this is an online game. So what we're actually quite lucky in is that we already have a big community, and we're growing the community. So by the time the game is what you would call finished, there'll be a pretty big population of people to venture around and have fun inside. And that's important for an online game because it's sort of the population, the community sort of dictates the success. So part of why we're doing, we share the stuff earlier is to bring the community in. The concept sales continue to sort of help not only sort of support some of the ongoing development efforts, but also just the costs of running a live service. So like, it's not free. I mean, we get Google and Amazon charge us money every month for the servers we run in the cloud, for all the servers that distribute the content, like when we do a new patch, we're downloading gigabytes of data to every individual person, so it ends up being petabytes of data overall. So it costs us money to run things continually, so all the builds we give backers, turning around, getting the feedback, doing it all, that just costs extra time, takes extra time. Like we have to make those, like work at making those builds as stable as possible, fix the bugs, and of course, if our engineers are doing that, they can't be working on new features. So there is a cost involved in running sort of the live game as we are doing now. But again, like I said, I think that is something that makes a big difference in terms of the ultimate quality of the game. And things like, concept sales or new people joining early, it's just helping sort of support that, as well as sort of create this big feature set. So for instance, a good example is you guys were visiting here in the German office and we showed you the procedural planet work that we're doing, and we wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have been able to afford to do that if we had just sort of raised our money and stopped. So that's all part of kind of the continual fundraising. We had a stretch goal for R&D into procedural techniques, but that was just R&D. That wasn't promising procedural planets and moons for everything. But now we're going to do that, and we're doing that because we've been able to continue bring new players in and continue to bring money in, and that new money just gets invested into making the game bigger and richer and deeper. And so that's kind of like my objective and goal is I want to make this game as cool as possible. I don't really care about making money, so all the money we can get in is really just about being able to hire the best programmers, the best artists, the best designers, and let them dream and build an even cooler and bigger world. So, I'm not really going to apologize for the concept sales for that, because for me it's just it's a way to make the game cooler and bigger, and ultimately I think everyone at the end of the day will be thankful of that. I mean, you wouldn't see a publisher invest this kind of money into this game with this much ambition, especially on the PC, and we're just doing it mostly because there's a community out there and a fan base out there that this is kind of their dream game and they're willing to support it, and I'm really thankful for that because it enables myself and the team here and the team in the other studios to deliver that. So it's just all about making the game as cool as possible, and if a few more ships help make it even better, then great. Well, I mean, so it's an ongoing. So one of the challenges we have is because we're building such a big, ambitious game, and then, of course, in some cases, like the procedural planet stuff that wasn't originally part of the plan, we've worked on the technology, we're really happy with it, and then we want to deliver it into the game as soon as possible because we think it's going to provide a huge amount more sort of play experience and opportunities for people to do. It does create a bit of a conundrum because when you make something more complicated or bigger, of course, it's going to take a bit more time. It definitely takes more people and more investment. But expectations in terms of when you're going to get the game, it's like someone from back the game in 2012, and we said, well, we're going to have it done in 2 to 3 years time. Yeah, but we were going to have something that was a lot more kind of sort of smaller, more focused in terms of experience you could do, but not have all the extra fidelity and detail that we've been adding into it. If you don't really know the process of building this, you go, why is it? Why some of these things taking as long as they are? And the real answer is, if the more complicated it is, and the bigger and the more ambitious, of course, it's going to take longer. And you really want to spend the time up front to build the systems first rather than retrofit them. So like there's 2 ways we could have done could have moved forward on Star Citizen. One would have been to have a much smaller game that doesn't do all the stuff that we're even doing right now in the alpha, because some of the stuff we're doing in the alpha we weren't even promising back in the day. And then just sort of add on additional modules or revisions of the game to get it to the ultimate vision, which is what we're shooting for now. And that's one way to do it. And the other way is to sort of go, okay, well, this is where we're aiming for now, so let's make sure that all the systems that we're building will be able to handle that. And that's kind of the approach we're taking. I'm not necessarily sure which one is better. This is the path we took. If you take a look at Elite Dangerous, ultimately they say their final feature set isn't going to be dissimilar to some of the stuff that we're doing, but they've started with a much smaller set that they said, okay, this is the finished game, and now we're going to do a season pass, and now we're going to go down and be able to see planets and drive around them, and at some point we'll have multi-crew, at some point we'll have FPS. But the problem with that approach is that if you haven't engineered the system to do all those things from the beginning, you have to rebuild stuff and retrofit stuff, and that can be more difficult and take more time along the way. It's like if you're building a castle from the very beginning, you can lay the foundations right. But if you just build a little house and then you want to build on these additions to end up to a castle, sometimes you're going to have to knock it all down and start again and build from the foundation. So we've sort of taken the latter approach. Like I said, both approaches are valid, which means that in the short run, things do take a little longer to get there. I think in the long run, it will end up in a better experience. And then the challenge for us as a developer is to just sort of make sure that we're sharing our progress with the community that's backed us, and letting them play stuff as we're doing it and getting their feedback with it. So that's kind of what we do. So we invest time and effort and money into doing that. And I think it will make the game better. And hopefully we're educating people that game develop isn't always quick and isn't always simple. But I quite like the process and the technique that we've taken, and my experience with everything, including all the games I've done in the past, is at the end of the day it counts about the game. So if no one, like everyone will tell you, like all these people that were, I remember everyone was upset that Uncharted 4 was delayed from it was meant to be out the previous last Christmas, and they pushed it to earlier this year, right? And everyone's like, I can't. And then of course it came out and it was really great, and you didn't hear anyone complaining that it was late. They were just saying, oh my God, this game's really great. And I think that's what people really count. I mean, and from my standpoint, if you invest this much time into making a game, as we are in Star Citizen, and this much effort and this much money, you don't want to say, oh, I've spent 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is making this game and it's not very good. I mean, that would be the worst thing you possibly could do. So I'd rather take the time and build it right, because we're also trying to build something that will go on for a long time, because we're not building a game you're going to play for a week and you're going to be done with. We're building a universe that you're going to venture around with, and hopefully you'll do it for years, in the same way that people still play EVE 10 years later, or they still play World of Warcraft 10 years later. Well, I mean, Star Citizen, I mean, it's a pretty demanding beast. I mean, the toughest thing is that we have 4 studios. So we have the studio here in Frankfurt that you're visiting, have a big studio up in Manchester, obviously the office that, the headquarters and where I live is Los Angeles, and we have a studio there, and then we have a studio in Austin, Texas. So there's a lot of travel that's involved. I mean, we do a lot of stuff online, so we communicate, we have various things like Office 365 and various sort of online collaboration, like kind of Confluence and Jira and a whole bunch of other things like Shotgun. And we use Skype a lot for video conferencing and IM, but nothing beats being in person, sort of looking at stuff over people's shoulders, having conversations, giving them feedback. So it just means I do a lot of traveling. So this last year and this year I've been doing a lot, which is kind of tough because, I have a family, 2 little daughters, and so, it's a bit of a sacrifice to sort of be apart from them as far as that goes. The other aspect that's kind of tough with the project is just because we're essentially a live project and people are playing the game there, and you have this big community that you've given them something, but they want something next month and the month after. So it sort of feels like you're in the magazine world, so you know how it's like. You got to publish if you don't publish, you die basically. So you have a little bit of that pressure that you wouldn't normally have in a typical like game development would be like, okay, here's our project, we're going to work on it for 3 or 4 years, and then we're going to show it publicly and announce the date it'll be out, and then everyone sort of crunches to make that date. But you have quite a while where you're sort of working behind closed doors, and you don't have the same sort of public pressure to continue, moving forward that you do when you're sort of public the way we are. So those are all sort of challenges as we sort of move forward making the game. That's kind of sort of the personal challenge for me, is how to spend enough time at the various studios in person, because I think that makes a big difference. Because also on such a big project, we have like 320 people. A lot of people will just be, they're the person making the weapons or the person working on the flight system here. So they don't have the big picture, and we do have like higher level sort of various like art directors or lead engineers or lead designers that have a bigger picture. But really, part of my job is also going to all the places, making sure everyone's kind of staying on board with the overall picture and vision of the project, and making sure that the different teams working on different things are all sort of fitting into that. So, in terms of managing and directing a project, it's probably the most challenging one I've ever done, because there's nothing I've done that's been of this scale. And the fact that you're doing it publicly is also, it's always challenging, and there's a lot of travel involved. So, that's challenging. So I would say those are kind of the sort of the personal challenges that come in. But ultimately, and I've said this before, the biggest driver or critic is myself. So like I'm making this game because this is the game I want to see happen and see play, and I can see a vision very clearly of how the game will work and be and interact. And usually when I'm there, it's like I sort of have this obsession of getting it out of my head and seeing it onto the screen. And so, for me, like I said, the biggest critic or driver is myself. So if I don't do that, I don't get it from here onto the screen, then I'm angry with myself. And, that taking longer than it should, that makes me like, no, we need to get further, I need to get further. So I would say, probably more of the pressure and stress comes from myself onto myself than or everyone else out there waiting for it. Even though I know they're all very, very keen for it, I'm tougher on myself than they are. And I think that's probably what's made me be able to do a lot of the games I've done, because the game, even back in the old days, the Wing Commander was still pretty ambitious and complicated. This is much, much more, but without that sort of like stubborn drive to get it from here onto the screen. Sometimes you can get overwhelmed with all the work that has to be done. And so I don't think that way. I'm like, okay, we're getting here. What do we have to do to get from here to here? And then what do we have to do to get from here to here? And that's the way I think. And so those are the pressures and challenges of working on Star Citizen. Obviously you guys are out here visiting. We're giving you a preview of sort of the procedural planet technology, which we're going to first share with the backers in 2.7. So right now we have 2.4 out, which is the first one that has like persistence. So your character or ship will persist between game sessions, which is sort of a standard MMO thing, but obviously in a standard sort of online multiplayer shooter like Battlefield or Call of Duty, they don't have that, whereas an MMO does. Your character, you keep your stats, over sessions, and what you accumulate, you keep over long term. So 2.4 had that. 2.5, which is the next one, patch we're out, we have a whole new location that's really for the sort of people that are on the outside the law, let's put it that way, not necessarily the bad people. That's sort of like their version of Port Olisar, which is the space station you spawn on right now in the Crusader setup, which is the mini PU for us. So that will be there as a new location. So in some ways you're going to have sort of two factions playing in this sort of multiplayer play space, which I think will be quite interesting. And then after that, 2.6 is the next one up, which we're planning on finally debuting Star Marine. So Star Marine is sort of so we already have FPS in the game. You can play it already in Crusader, run around, shoot people, and Port Korea or wherever else that you're allowed to use your guns. But Star Marine's sort of a dedicated game mode, just like Arena Commander is for dogfighting. So if, outside the persistent universe, you want to test your FPS skills and just come in with some other players in a sort of contained area or map, you can do that the same way that Arena Commander lets you test your dogfighting skills. And inside our world, they're sort of games with inside games, like a fictional game that you can play inside the universe of Star Citizen. But we thought it was quite important to have that because we've been working a lot on the FPS mechanics, techniques. So there's some stuff that will go with that people haven't seen yet in terms of sort of controls and smoothness of movement and kind of how the weapons feel, and that we felt like we wanted to get it out there so people could play sort of multiplayer FPS sessions, sort of learn the weapons and how to do that, and also do it in a manner that they don't have to fly a distance and hope there'll be some other people in this area for them to sort of fight with. So that will be sort of 2.6, and then 2.7, which is the one after that, is the one that will have the first iteration of the procedural planets, where we're starting to lay out Stanton, which is the first star system that we're going to be giving players. Right now, players are playing in a portion of the Stanton system around this gas giant called Crusader, and they start on Port Olisar, which is the space station that's outside that. But none of the planets, you can't actually go to the planet and land and walk around the planet, whereas with the procedural planets, you'll be able to do that. So that's a big step, because there's a huge amount more sort of playable content. And 2.7 will sort of have the beginnings of that, which will have at least one of the landing locations, the Levski landing location, and then obviously Port Olisar and the pirate outlaw base, which is called Grim Hex, and a lot of the sort of planets and moons will be real ones you can go land on. And then over the next few releases, we'll be sort of fleshing out the other landing areas, like ArcCorp will not be a standalone, it will be on the proper planet in the Stanton system, and Microtech and Hurston, which are the other two sort of landing locations in the Stanton system, along with lots of space stations. And so our goal is to get the Stanton system fully sort of functioning, where you can go between these locations, take jobs, make money, buy, sell equipment, ships, interact with other players, come across NPC, AI, defend yourself against them, attack them depending on who they are, rob things for them if you want to be a pirate, whatever. So that's kind of the goal for us, and that's sort of the path. Once we have Stanton working, then we're going to start to bring on other star systems online, but we want to get this whole kind of player ecosystem working in Stanton first, where it's a bit more contained. And during the process of that, we'll be bringing on other sort of background features, like I mentioned earlier this morning, we were talking about some of the stuff we're doing on the network, where we're going to have this sort of mesh of servers, so we'll be able to have, hopefully, a large amount of players all in the same area, so we don't have to instance it in the way that originally we were thinking we're going to have to instance it. We have a kind of different server design now that could potentially have thousands of players all in the same sort of area at the same time, which would be really cool, because that's something that, again, is not something that you could get a year ago or 10 years ago, but with sort of the newer tech, the power of the machines, kind of some of the stuff you can do in the cloud, the possibility is sort of opened up, and we want to utilize it. I think one of the points we were making earlier when we were sort of showing the procedural tech for the planets is really how it's sort of built to be artist authored and driven. And the reason why we're doing that is the whole approach in Star Citizen is to sort of have a designed universe, right? So we've created a lore and a history for this universe, and we have very specific. We don't want to sort of just procedurally randomly generate these planets and they just whatever comes out of the magic formula. We want to say, no, in this system, like in the case of, say, Stanton, that where the first star system that we're going to let players play in, there's 4 specific planets that have been sort of bought or taken over by the different corporations. So ArcCorp, Hurston, Crusader, and Microtech are big corporations that are part of the lore of Star Citizen itself. And this is a system that UEE sort of sold the different planets to these various companies, and these companies are sort of like almost like company, like in the old days they would have these company towns, whether it would be in England or America or probably over here in Germany too, but this is sort of like a company planet, right? And so they're very designed, like Microtech is a sort of it's the furthest out from the sun, so it's a cold planet, snow, ice, think of it like Hoth, say in Star Wars. Whereas Hurston is a planet that's over, it's been basically over industrialized, it's polluted, they've stripped all the natural resources from it, so it's, it's like covered in smog, and basically they've poisoned the planet because they've run their factories and smelting ore and the whole stuff. It's sort of almost like, I don't know where you want to call it, like a industrial hell on earth. And Crusader, they have their sort of platforms building the ships floating above the gas giant. So there's very specific looks and feels of it, and it's all driven by the universe and the lore. So we're building and constructing the whole game along that way. So it should feel like the history and the setup of the universe should just come across as you're moving across. The factions that are set up, that we've set up in the history, will be in the game. There'll be a combination of sort of procedurally generated missions based on what's happening in the economy that will provide opportunity for you as a player or AI to take if a player isn't taking it, and just create sort of ongoing commerce and activity in the universe. And then there will be also specific sort of more crafted story missions sprinkled in there to give a sense of identity and character and narrative to the world itself. So the idea is hopefully it'll have a very strong identity. When you're on certain planets that we've described in our various pieces of lore on the website, you'll really feel that. I mean, you'll feel this like it's a real universe, a real world. When you go down, you should be able to sort of almost sort of taste the air, basically, and everything. All our design decisions are based around being able to deliver that. I mean, we're very consistent. Like, we have all these different ships, we have different manufacturers for spaceships. That each manufacturer has certain styles and background and history. Is the same on weapons. If you go around here later on, I think we'll stop by with the sort of weapons team is here, and so the bearing, like personal FPS weapons, have a very specific style that will be different than a different manufacturer, say A&R or someone like that. So we're really trying to, from the bottom up, build a constructed, tangible, real world that sort of feels like it's been crafted. Well, I'm basically remaking Wing Commander with Squadron 42. I mean, it's very much in the sort of flavor of how I would have done a Wing Commander. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, Wing Commander is something that be a lot of fun to go back and make using the modern techniques. But again, that is pretty much Squadron 42. Is I'm essentially doing what I would have done for a new version of Wing Commander, but obviously in this newly created universe and world. So it'd be kind of hard to say, because the other aspect is, Star Citizen itself is kind of like taking Privateer and Freelancer, but, going a lot further than any of those did, but it's the same general kind of idea of building a sort of constructed world that you adventure around inside. But of course it's in the Star Citizen universe and has a lot more fidelity and, a lot more ambition. So I guess I could say that I'm kind of remaking quite a few of my old games all at once, all inside Star Citizen. And even as we showed today, flying over the planet, you could almost feel like it was Strike Commander too. The only thing I'm probably not doing is remaking like Times of Law, which was a fantasy-based game. I mean, the whole Star Citizen setup is pretty much like taking a whole bunch of different games and putting it inside one and having you be able to do whatever you want.